1997, protesters have been demanding political reforms and the resignation of President Abdullah Ali Saleh. He's said he will leave office in 2013, but he doesn't want to resign by the end of this year, as the opposition is calling for. However, just today, he said that he will put forward a new constitution. He'll put forward a constitution before a referendum, and said he would back a parliamentary system of government rather than the current presidential system. And I gather the opposition has rejected that. Now, although the Saleh government has pledged not to use force against protesters, force has been used against protesters both in Sana'a and elsewhere, as recently as this Tuesday at Sana'a University, where two students were killed. In response to this, there have been some very high-level defections from Saleh's team, including several cabinet ministers. And I gather the total number of resignations from the ruling party has come to about 16. So all of this is happening in a country that was already suffering from enormous problems. We didn't call it a failed state, but people like to use the word failing state. Protests are happening against the backdrop of a secession movement in the south, a tribal uprising in the north, security threats due to the presence of al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, and, of course, severe economic problems. So what are the U.S.'s concerns about Yemen? What can it do to help stabilize a state whose collapse into civil war or chaos would destabilize the Gulf, embolden al-Qaeda, and, of course, create misery for millions of its citizens? Who are the players and parties in this growing opposition movement? What exactly are their demands? What is their flexibility? Who can be expected to fill the vacuum left by Saleh should he resign? And what are the regional concerns and implications of a Yemen that falls into a civil war, or a Yemen that is run by someone other than Saleh? What impact might these changing dynamics have on neighbors like Saudi Arabia? Well, here to address these many questions is an incredible gathering of Yemen experts in a town where there are very few Yemen experts, as I know, because I'm always looking for them. And we're extremely fortunate to have with us today our panelists, including Ambassador Janet Sanderson. She was appointed Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for the Arabian Gulf and the Maghreb in 2009. I had no idea that the State Department combined these two rather different regions. You are an extremely busy individual, needless to say. Ambassador Sanderson served as ambassador to Haiti and Algeria. She's held diplomatic postings in Amman, Kuwait, Tel Aviv, and Dhaka, a true Middle East expert at a time when they are desperately needed. Ms. Sanderson is also the recipient of numerous State Department awards, including the 1996 Herbert Salzman Award for International Economic Performance. Charles Schmitz is Associate Professor of Geography at Towson University in Baltimore, Maryland. He's a specialist on the Middle East and Yemen, particularly Yemen, where he began his academic career as a Fulbright scholar in the 1990s. He's written extensively on Yemen, including in the book Yemen into the 21st Century, Continuity and Change, as well as for the Jamestown Foundation, Merup, and other publications. And finally, Chris Boucek, am I pronouncing that correctly? Thank you. Is an associate in the Carnegie Middle East program, where his research focuses on security challenges in the Arabian Gulf and North Africa. There seems to be a connection. He's a leading authority on terrorism, security, and stability issues in Saudi Arabia and Yemen. He's written widely on the Middle East, on terrorism and counter-radicalization for a variety of publications, including the Washington Post, the International Herald Tribune, the Christian Science Monitor, and many others. I want to thank you all once again for joining us, and we're going to begin with Ambassador Sanderson. Thank you. Would you like to speak from the, or do you prefer to?
I prefer to sit.
That's just fine.
Okay. I'd like this to be a little bit more casual if we can. And first, before I start, let me thank Kate and Wendy for inviting me, indeed, inveigling. I have spent the last couple of weeks dealing almost exclusively with Libya, so it's been quite a treat to come back to Yemen. Although I would note that I won't call myself, particularly with this distinguished panel, a Yemen expert. I am more a voyeur in many ways. Luckily, on the ground in our embassy and in our department, we do have Yemen experts, and they have certainly given me a lot of assistance over the last 20 months as I've tried to grapple with this challenging, infinitely interesting, but somewhat troubled country. And it's been particularly interesting over the last couple of months. You know, as we have seen events of the last few months in the region, as we have seen the public cries for change in the Arab world, change that's tailored to particular circumstances and particular cultures, It's been easy, I think, to focus on the big names, on the Libyas and on the Tunisias and on the Egyptians, where obviously in Yemen the cry for change has been going on for a long time. I get a big kick out of the fact that Al Jazeera English has now become must-see TV in Washington. But certainly I think it speaks to the interest that we all have in the events in the region. But we're here to talk about Yemen, and it does seem to us, as we look at the country from our perspective on C Street, that it seems ever more poised on the edge of some type of major transformation. As Kate noted, demonstrations are continuing, parties are caucusing, and politicians, as always, are speechifying. Now, with regard to the demonstrations, despite our best efforts, I think it's very hard for anyone, including our friends in the embassies on the ground, to really get a good sense of what's going on. The participants vary, the numbers vary, the locations vary from day to day. And we know that there have been student-led participations, protests rather. We know that these have grown in number to include tens of thousands of people in Sana'a and Aden and Taiz and other cities. The protesters range from civil society to political parties to pro-regime protesters, and we're beginning to see elements of tribal influence as well as Islamists. There is a call for change in the street, and I have to say that as you look at it, this call for this expression of public sentiment is refreshing and indeed a healthy aspect of life in Yemen. However, it can be a combustible mix, and unfortunately we have seen violence break out in a number of these demonstrations, most recently, of course, the night before last. Our embassy in Sana'a is working on trying to figure out exactly what happened, but we know that there were scores injured and at least one dead. And that and the violence at other demonstrations points to the fact the situation is extremely unpredictable, and it also, to me at least, underscores the need for leadership at all parties to listen to the people. In Sana'a, as you're aware, there are pro-government demonstrators camped at Tahrir Square for over a month, and the anti-government demonstrators are encamped around the university. Most of these protests have indeed been peaceful, and most of them have been relatively restrained, no matter what we may read in the press. However, there have been violent clashes between pro and anti-government demonstrators, and between protesters and government security forces. And I have to say that this is an issue of grave concern to the United States government, and we're particularly worried by incidents where one group appears to be going after another and provoking violent clashes. We have strongly urged the Yemeni government to investigate and prosecute any individuals in the security forces that are involved in inciting or conducting violence against protesters, and we have continuously called on Yemenis of all stripes to refrain from violence. We do believe strongly in the right of free expression and the right to convey one's views to the government. And we want to make sure that in Yemen, as in elsewhere in the world, that these rights are not trampled. Peaceful demonstrations, I don't need to tell this group, are critical to the democratic process. And as we know in every country, it's really up to the Yemenis to decide how their country is going to be run. We have worked very hard at all levels of the U.S. government to continually engage with Saleh and his government, as well as leaders of the opposition party, and with civil society activists on a range of issues of interest to the United States, including political reform. Let me be clear, though, I get this question a lot, and I want to make sure that I get it out once again. We support a peaceful, a stable, and a unified Yemen. And we strongly support the principle of dialogue among the political players. That includes the government, that includes the opposition, that includes civil society, that includes all groups that want to have their voices heard. And we call on all parties to engage in a serious, a productive, and a useful discussion about the country's future. And we do believe that it's only through this give and take between government, between people, that the long-term stability and security of any country is guaranteed.